On that note, let's get started. What is up, everybody, and welcome to the Data on Kubernetes community live stream number 117. And we are with none other than the Doug E. Fresh of Data Mesh, the legitimate father of some beautiful children and the illegitimate father of the cow duck. He is a fan of NAS. He has worked with refugees in Greece. He's done lots of other stuff too that's very exciting. Today he's going to be talking to us about Data Mesh. His name is Luke Feeney. Luke Feeney, welcome back to the Data on Kubernetes community. Very nice to have you with us. How are you doing?
Great to be here, Bart. Thanks for having me. I'm doing great. I'm here in Dublin in Ireland. It's raining, mixed with sun, mixed with snow, and excited to be here.
That's good. For those of us,
I like the intro, by the way.
Yeah,
it's a real mixed bag there,
But it's
I like
all true.
The NAS bit. The NAS bit's great, but I mean,
I
like early NAS. I like Illmatic. Got a little bit mixed up when he got famous though, and started making worse music. It's a bit of a shame.
Don't let that happen to you. Another fun fact that I didn't mention is that Luke is not only a fruit and vegetable eater, but he eats orange peels. So that's a fun fact for all of y'all today. Not only will you, that's fact, not making it up. When did that start? If you don't mind me asking.
Well, I always like the marmalade that has the chunks in it, the chunks of peel.
Yeah, the zest.
So it's kind of only a little step away from eating the zest. I'm a huge orange eater. I lived in Greece and in south of France for a long time and ate a lot of oranges there, and I've brought the habit with me.
Yeah, it's a good habit. I definitely like oranges, definitely high on my list. But anyway, apart from that, when you're not eating orange peels, you're working very, very hard in a beautiful startup that's called TerminusDB. Can you tell us about that just for folks that maybe don't know you so well?
Sure. So TerminusDB is an open source graph database and document store. We are a spin out from Trinity College in Dublin. We spun out in 2018. Our origin goes back to a large Horizon 2020, which is the European Commission's funding program, a research grant for 4 million euros that we won, leading a consortium of universities and research institutes and some private sector guys to build the technical architecture for something called SESHAT, the Global History Data Bank. It's this big multidisciplinary project to bring together all of the social and economic data sets from all of human history and then provide them in a machine readable format so people can do long durée historical analysis to try and use the past to predict, long trends into the future. So we were building the technical architecture for that. And as you can imagine, it's quite a complex from a data perspective. It's very complicated schema. It's changing a lot. There's sub schema with sub rules. There's lots of constraints. There's non-professionals inputting data into it. It's drawing a lot of data from automated scripting, from scraping websites and from Excel workbooks. So it's complicated. And we realized that we had something that was general purpose, that was based around graph technology, and we sought to spin it out. And we started off doing large-scale graph analytic installation. So for people that know, graph databases, something like Tiger Graph, trying to go into build, big graph analytic systems to do predictive analytics mostly on large amounts of data. Then we pivoted a bit and went open source, and because we found that it was difficult. We have our own query language, and we found it was difficult to get that through to people if they hadn't had some exposure. So better to try and start bottoms up. And we've been at that. We open sourced it in early 2020, and it's hard to know how much time has passed between now and early 2020, but a pandemic's worth of time. However, that much feels like, sometimes it feels like 10 years, sometimes it feels like 2 weeks. So we're now looking at a more modular system for building data intensive applications that are backed by graph. So providing people with a JSON, patch, and diff API with those different building blocks that you might need if you're building a data intensive application, trying to work a lot more friendly with other people's systems. So providing schema as a service for MongoDB, interacting with other services kind of on the fringes around data intensive applications. So that's kind of where we are. We're on GitHub and all good internet browsers.
And maybe even some bad ones. Who knows?
Find us on Tor. We're in there in the dark web. I actually I went to my first physical meetup again since the beginning of the pandemic yesterday. And it was the Web3 and Blockchain Ireland meetup. So lots of very unusual characters. It was a funny way to start back into the world, but great to get back into meeting people in person, I have to say. Really great.
That is really great. And very much looking forward to doing more of that, in our community. Hopefully be able to do something together in Ireland in the near future. For folks, that are in London, we will be in London next month in person. And also just going to take advantage, because this is such a beautiful segue, of our co-located event that we'll be doing in KubeCon. That event will be online. However, if speakers are available to give their talks in person in Valencia, they can do the live stream with us. I just dropped the CFP in the chat, just as a reminder, if you want to get your talks in. Very, very clear guidelines of what we're looking for. So please take advantage of that. Now, Luke, to kind of cut to the chase, because we could spend all day talking about orange peels, and those who don't study their history are doomed to repeat it. But we're here to talk about data mesh. So data mesh is a hot topic. I mean, and for folks that want to take that a little bit further, there's a great Slack channel that's very, very active where lots of stuff's going on there. I originally just began looking around at different podcasts about data stuff in general. I don't know if it was in the data engineering podcast or where I first heard about it, but very, very famously, the primary figure, who I imagine you'll touch on later, although I don't want to mispronounce her name, Zamak Deghani, of Iranian descent background, doing amazing work on this paradigm of data mesh, and a lot of which, from what I understand, relates to transparency, ownership, and to be able to make better decisions inside organizations, as the amount of data that organizations handles is growing. But obviously you're here to sort of unpack this better for us, Luke. So that being said, if you want to start sharing your screen, take it away.
Sure. Thanks, Bart. I think you're one of the best men for unpacking things, really. So you've done a good job to kick me off there. And I think, that just to, before I share my slides, I think that point is one that really needs to be underlined, that this is a socio-technological paradigm. It is not simply saying, here is a new piece of technology, and I am a technology vendor in a sense. I mean, we're open source and we're kind of community driven, but we're a vendor of technology. And typically, you have a problem with the way that you manage your data. A vendor proposes to you, here is a piece of technology that will solve all your problems. And,
Gotcha.
Here is IBM's Watson, as a very bad example, but, something like that.
Shout out to IBM.
As a solution, whereas this is not really that. This is about organizational transformation combined with technology, and using current technologies and maybe some new technologies in order to do it. But on that bombshell, I will share my.
But I think that's great. And I think it's a good reminder that whether we're talking about Kubernetes or data mesh or anything else, don't just fall into the belief that it's okay, there's a README, there's a GitHub, I download this and I get started. There are so many other things to be considering there. And I think some of these will be unraveled as Luke's talk continues. That being said, who is that beautiful child of God in the photo right there?
I don't know what happened to him. He was corrupted by the world. That is me. That's Luke Feeney. I'm one of the founders of TerminusDB. That was taken some years ago.
6 months.
6 months ago, exactly. So you can see that I had my mother lived in a permanent pandemic where the hairdressers were shut down, and just put the bowl directly on top of our heads and cut around the edges to give us those beautiful haircuts. And my brothers, who you can't see in the background there,
had matching bowl cuts.
Exactly,
yeah.
Matching bowl cuts. Anyway, I as I said, I'm one of the co-founders of TerminusDB. We are a team of 12, mostly engineers, who are building, linked data architecture, linked data modular systems to try and help people to build data-intensive applications. I'm not going to talk too much about TerminusDB. I will segue into it at the end just to give you an idea of how we think about these problems. But I'll start off with this problem that managing. And can you just see my the slides? Can you?
Yes, perfect,
great. So managing databases in the CI/CD pipeline is a nightmare. I don't know how many people, and probably quite a few people here, are involved in that type of thing, given this is the data on Kubernetes community. Migration scripts are better than making changes on running servers, but become hard to manage in complex modern pipelines. I hope that's kind of just taken as a given, because it certainly feels like one to me. And really, in general, in TerminusDB, one of the things that we're interested in is everything as code, and managing data as code. And I think that there's been so many advances in managing infrastructure as code that now we need to start thinking about managing everything as code. So the modern developer has it easy, to my mind. With Git, CI/CD, infrastructure as code, and the public cloud, you can have an idea in the shower, you write some code after breakfast, you commit it to Git, and then you're collaborating with your colleagues after lunch. And you then Docker up your app, you Terraform some infrastructure, create the CI/CD pipeline, test everything, and you've got everything deployed to production by dinner. I'm sure everybody recognizes that it's exactly as easy as that. And then by beer o'clock, you're sitting back and you're watching the hype grow on Hacker News, hopefully wearing that fetching t-shirt. But then, we have a beautiful story of a beautiful developer going through their life in such an easy and modern way, but they wake up, you wake up screaming in the night. And what is the horror that haunts your dreams? What is the nightmare that invades your peaceful bliss and spreads terror across your face?
An orange without a peel.
Well, they have those in the supermarket now, which are distressing.
That is very distressing.
Yeah.
Put a stop to that immediately.
But what is it that could cause such terror? It's the data. It's the damn database. Every application is perfect. It's beautiful. It's flawless until you have, real users and their stupid data. That's what brings the pain. And you want to push more amazing of your beautiful, amazing, hierarchical, well thought out code to production, but the database rears its ugly head. And I saw that Slack was down yesterday, so I'd be interested whether it was what exactly was the problem there, but I'd bet you some data was involved. So, and the database has come to Freddy. It raises its, iconic knife-fingered glove and sneers. And as I was saying, managing databases in the CI/CD pipeline is, as Freddy says, a nightmare. So Git, CI/CD and cloud APIs have transformed the way software is made. And as we can see, we have this gentleman in the slide to thank for a lot of that. So Linus Torvalds, the inventor of Git, who has a sometimes controversial and confrontational personality in a nice way, I think, though. So the days of slow and deliberate software releases with loads of manual work are, I think, gone. And now we live in a world of continuous everything as code. But data is still, and I'm sorry to say it, in the dark ages. When the application is live, it has production data. Production data is important, especially to users. It needs to be preserved. We can't just wipe it out when we release a new version of the software to production. And the new version of your software has schema changes and new data, and that all needs to be updated as well. In the old days, when software changed such that the database schema had to also change, the DBAs would wait around for a few months. They try and hide mostly. And then eventually, after those several months, they do some entity relationship diagrams. They take backups. They'd modify the schema on the live server, and then they basically pray for the best. And back then, I suppose, software didn't deploy very regularly, less than sort of Hollywood stars would bring out new movies. And when we thought of agile, we thought of Soviet gymnasts and not software development teams like that chap there who looks very agile altogether. But these days, applications are developed continuously. Different versions of application need to run in test, dev, and staging environments, each of which has different data and different schema. So that makes for a difficult set of challenges in the setup of each environment and the reliable promotion of software from one environment to the next. And moving data to production requires not only updating database schema with the latest changes, but also updating existing data such that it's valid with the new schema. And then staging environments need copies of production data in order to test things properly. You also need all the new data and schema changes that are required to make the new version of the software work. So you're moving data and schema up and down the pipeline. But unlike your software source code, you don't have Git to clone, branch, and merge your changes. You do migrations, and migrations, as we probably all know, are flaky, slow, and sometimes error prone, and can be a little bit terrifying, to be honest. But the good thing about a migration is that you can store it in version control with your code, which is, at least makes it easier to manage. So then we get these chaps coming along, the hipster programmers armed with JavaScript, and they enjoy their single origin coffee, and they're, probably his glasses actually have fake lenses. I've recently had to get glasses for seeing things far away, but they're also a useful prop to make me look more serious. So with microservices, feature flags, and various rollout strategies, and and multiple versions of mobile apps, you need to support all sorts of versions of schema at the same time, and it all can become quite unmanageable. At the same time, organizations have recognized the data as one of those really key factors for increasing and sustaining innovation, and driving value for customers and business units. So you have lots of organizations that are trying to modernize data platforms. And, that's a very, very simple setup, as you'll have seen from lots of these previous meetups. It's the amount of complexity that you can get into this setup is enormous, and into these diagrams is enormous. But I've just chosen something that's very straightforward, just to give us a kind of image of where we're at. So, people are modernizing traditional data platforms with cloud native technologies, and that are scalable and feature rich and pretty cost effective. And the beauty of a centralized model like this is that it simplifies staffing and training by centralizing all the data and technical expertise in a single place. So you don't have as much technical debt, so you're managing a single data platform, so that reduces operational costs. So you have a big data engineering team, and that can then be divided out into technical functions that they support. So one team might own ingestion, one team might own data pipelines, ETL code, orchestrating job runs, those sorts of stuff, meeting SLAs. So you have everything potentially centralized. But it can create, and look at that beautiful monolith there, it can create problems with scaling, with ownership, and with accountability. Scaling often from a human perspective as much as anything else, growing data engineering teams massively, and finding the sort of skills to go into data engineering teams can be a big challenge. But also then from a kind of data perspective into the data warehouse or wherever else it might be. And specific central teams might not understand the needs of a data domain, due to different types and storage, security, data catalog requirements, specific technologies needed for processing, all sorts of different challenges around specific data that comes out of one of those applications that we were talking about before. So when you're looking to make business decisions driven by data, it can be a good idea to adopt a mindset that looks to deliver data products from specialized teams rather than through a centralized data management platform that provides generalized analytics.
Luke, you muted yourself.
That was a nice move.
Was that self-censorship?
That was self-censorship.
You were talking about the monoliths. You were talking about some secret about the appearance of the monoliths.
I think that Snowflake might have a script installed on my computer that mutes me every time that I try and insult the company.
And
So
they saw your glasses come on. They knew you were serious.
that's it. They knew I was serious. um, it allows, if you can give ownership and autonomy to the team that owns the data, then they can focus on building data products rather than being limited to a common central approach. So you can make product teams responsible for ensuring that things like product inventory are regularly updated, and that the schema is developed to take account of new features, new realities that team is facing. So when a discrepancy occurs, they're the ones fixing it. So they can then implement a technical solution to ingest, process, and produce a data product, which then can enforce security, auditing, all that sort of stuff. So in a big bowl there, it's a little bit like a microservice architecture for code. So you build, in that case, you build the services, you expose APIs, you advertise SLAs for those APIs, and then you operate those services, and you own the end-to-end customer experience. And so that's the way that, AWS and Amazon famously does it and did it by making everything internal, those microservices that talk to each other through a kind of contract. And really, that's an important aspect, I think, of the way that data mesh and the data mesh ideas work. These are the big principles that Zhamak, who you mentioned, Bart, outlined in her foundational paper, which I will drop into the chat or into the notes afterwards. But so basically, there's a lot of information out there about this. I'm not going to go through it in any great detail what her point of view is, but I'll try and break them down a little bit into more digestible nuggets. So data producers in the end own the implementation of serving of data products. So there's a domain focus. The teams that understand the data should develop the data. This overcomes that problem that we mentioned about the central data warehouse, which is meant to clean and maintain the data, but they're not experts about the data domain. So the domain that it's working on, say it's an application development that's delivering some functionality out to customers. As the data team, they're not necessarily people that are experts in that, so they have some problems with delivering data that's well structured and well understood. And they're also then not consumers of that data. There's usually downstream teams, data analytics, data science teams that are consumers. So they're somewhere in the middle. And I think it's a very common experience for downstream users in large corporates to be the ones that are screaming the loudest. They're the ones saying, hey, give me my report. I want this from the data warehouse. I'm giving out about the data warehouse team because they're simply not producing quickly enough the sort of outputs that are required.
We've got a question, Luke.
Uh-huh.
How can you achieve data governance in data mesh?
Okay, well, I'm going to get to that now in a second, because I think that's
good.
one of the most important things of all, to my mind.
Attack. Good. Keep going.
So data teams are cross-functional groups who build data products. So you're going to have, and again, this gets back to the socio-technological piece that we spoke about at the beginning, and we'll speak about again, because one of the problems that I've seen when people are talking about real-world implementations of data mesh is that splitting up data engineering teams and giving them out to different teams across the organization is very hard, and has lots of secondary problems that are difficult to manage as well. People like to be on teams and collaborating with teams of people that have similar incentives and similar perspectives and similar and managers who understand the work very directly. And understand the complexity of the work and the difficulty of the work. And if you're then a data engineer who's put onto a product team, it can be a more difficult sort of and less attractive sort of position. So that's definitely something that has to be managed within cross-functionality of teams. I kind of think it's a better thing to be put in there, but maybe that's just my brain rather than other people's. So data is a product, and that's, it's commodity data. It's well structured, it's well described, it's easily found, it's easily consumable, which is really important, because people have to be able to mix and match data products in order to have the same type of analytics that you're going to have in the current setup, if you've got a big monolith at the core. So the data product is going to have potentially some different inputs for its construction and can have all sorts of ingredients, like one of these tomato soups. There could be human curation or AI, or it could have different elements which form it. But the consumer who's using it doesn't have to know how the soup's made, because it's now a soup. It's not the bits that went into the soup. The tomatoes are gone. They're now a product. And then self-service data. So that's quite important as well, that there's simple discoverability, that services tell you where the product you want is. So you can find the aisle for the grocery store, where the data you want is. And then the process of obtaining that data is fairly straightforward. So you're going to have an API, and the more standard, the better, I'd say, such as, HTTPS, as a very straightforward and standard way for accessing that data. And so then governance, and as the questioner correctly noticed, that it's probably one of the most important elements. And it's a funny one, because data mesh is a decentralizing urge. It is the urge to say that the periphery is moving faster than the core, and therefore we should provide the periphery with the tools to move at its own cadence. And that is very much the similar arguments from microservices and domain-driven design previously. Teams are moving fast. Having a monolithic code base doesn't make sense, so allow them to manage the cadence of their own releases from their own base, so that they can move at their own pace, rather than having to do everything through central with lots of dependencies and lots of bits and pieces that stick together. But in that scenario, you do need to have a centralizing force as well. And the centralizing force has to be governance. So you need to have a data council that is at least imposing some common definitions where they bubble up. And to my mind, bubbling up is the right way to think about it. You don't need to impose something that never works, which is a organization-wide ontology or taxonomy. It's very difficult to do that, because it's too granular to get into definitions of every object that you're going to have within your data domain. So better to have those terms and those concepts that bubble up and require definition across the organization to be dealt with, rather than every single thing. But if you're just saying to teams, hey, just pick your own tools and just go at it, there's also some difficulty there. So there does probably need to be some definition around that. And much as with microservices, even if you're allowing teams to move at their own cadence, you probably, for organizations of any normal size, you don't want implementations in multiple different languages and frameworks. You'd probably prefer those to be standardized and governed by some central rules. So, I think that it's really important that it has those human and technological structures to deal with questions of discoverability, interoperability, and scaling, exactly how those are going to work. And it can't be entirely technical. There are obviously tools that's going to make your life easier, but it really can't be entirely technical.
Got another question from Luan. What's up, Luan? Okay, he's got a question about data sharing. What are the best tools to do this in data mesh environments? I just know lake formation, and it doesn't look like, and it doesn't like it too much.
Which tool do you say?
Yeah, what are the best tools? Okay, so he has a question about data sharing.
Sure.
What are the best tools to do that in the data mesh environment?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, because there's a lot of tooling that isn't quite built yet for things like data sharing. But there are a few different tools that are nascent that do a sort of Git for data sort of thing. TerminusDB obviously being one of them. Planet Scale, which is obviously a big one that does a lot of that type of data sharing. They have concepts like branching of databases and other things like that. There's DoT, DoT Hub, which is another open source database that provides the ability to do sharing of tabular data. But yeah, the question is an apt one, because the tooling is underdeveloped for exactly that, and also underdeveloped for mixing and matching of data products. How do you pull from this data product, combine this one in order to get a derivative data product that allows me to do some second tier analytics off that?
Okay. Underdeveloped, we might be able to make an analogy with the Irish national basketball team, but getting there.
Not getting there. They're not getting there.
Okay,
it is getting there on the data.
The tooling for data mesh is much more promising regarding data sharing than the Irish national basketball.
I'm telling you. Okay. I actually have no idea how good the Irish national basketball team is, which would be a sign that it's very poor.
Okay.
We do have a national basketball arena though, so who knows? Maybe we'll come good one day. I suspect it's probably a bunch of, guys that didn't make it in college basketball from the United States who are on our team now via having an Irish granny.
Yes.
But that again is that's pure speculation on my part.
So I've got a chance then. That's good.
You do. You definitely do. So where does this leave our hero? In a sense, like his life has gotten a little bit more difficult, because previously as a developer on a product team, he was extracting his data and then just throwing it over a wall effectively to a central team that probably built the schema, structured the data coming into the data warehouse, and then did all the work in order to serve that up to downstream users. And also provided any of the governance that's required. And I think in those sorts of environments, governance is usually an afterthought because it's all centralized, and so governance is not as important as it is in a decentralized system like a data mesh structure. But he throws it all over the wall, and his life is fine. But then downstream users are the ones that suffer. There is kind of upside for him as well, because he's more involved in the ownership and the end-to-end ownership of his product and the data that is derived from his product too, which I think is something that's probably undervalued a little bit, how much people care about having that end-to-end ownership of the data that's being served up, and how much people care about building really detailed and useful data models around the data that's coming out of these things and keeping those up to date. I kind of think those are very important, and I think in an SQL world that's very important as well. I think sometimes in MongoDB, the application developer document databases, it can be forgotten about, which is a shame, because it is important and it is something that adds value very quickly. So, as I said, data mesh is fundamentally a socio-technological idea or set of ideas. So really about technology, infrastructure, people, goals and metrics, culture, and processes and procedures. It really covers all of those. And it's difficult to think about it just as technology or just as people. It has to fit all of those bits together to really make sense. So I'm going to now just slightly pivot and give our technological take on how you might address some of these challenges, and really speaking from a TerminusDB perspective, because as we know, JSON documents are central to software developers, and what we try and do is we try and make it easy for people to enter data using JSON. We're schema first, so we try and develop data models and then add data according to this model, which is very important for building graphs. And it becomes even more important when you start worrying about what we talked about there, which is collaboration between graphs. So each one of those data teams, domain teams, has a data product, which is built on some software or it's built on some data infrastructure. and then they're trying to collaborate between each other, and it's very difficult, and it's difficult to share data, it's difficult to get other people's data. But if you have a model driven approach, it makes it much easier to think of how you collaborate between those graphs. So we also have tools to help people build unique keys for objects, which is kind of critical for that federation of data products, which is obviously central to data mesh. So in our world, then data documents are not just trees. They can have links, they can store links, and the fact that they are links is understood because the schema provides us with the ability to check and disambiguate them. And then documents, obviously, like this, as you see here, this is our great link between yourself and myself, Bart, through Ireland to the USA, Joe Blogs and Jill Smith and Elm Street and Main Street. So it shows how JSON documents correspond to elements in our graph. And we genuinely have a graph, so you can follow links or chains of links very easily and efficiently. And so it's a kind of what we call a document graph. So trying to take the best of JSON world and bring it into a graphy type of world. And we have universal identifiers in the sense of URLs, so which we shamelessly steal from the semantic web world. And that allows us to do kind of fast local search against links, and also allows us to take a late binding approach to link across different graphs. And so we resolve those dynamic links to join various data products together. So you have that dynamic versus the static linking. And this is kind of how we think about what a data mesh looks like from a technical perspective of all of those different data domains being able to interlink. And then provide downstream self-service data for business via queries and via an API for machine learning and JSON for reports for data scientists and data analysts. Because we have those universal identifiers, we can mix and match data products, and we can then query across multiple data products simultaneously to explore the links across them. And if the identifiers are formed from sensitive data, you can encrypt, or you can create URIs with a hash. And we're kind of looking at how we're going to introduce some encryption technology into that as well. So then you have opaque identifiers that you can refer to, which create real information somewhere else while you retain those useful links. So, what I'm thinking of there often is, say, HR has a data product, which is all of the people that work in an organization. And their employee numbers. And what's happened in the past is this has been sent off, or at least a part of that has been sent off to a central data warehouse team, and then served up for downstream users to reference against when they're doing some internal analytics on workforce or something like that, the data science team. But the HR team doesn't update it the right way, and there's a communication lag. They have to go and talk to a data engineer every time they want to change it in the data warehouse team, and they hate doing that because the data engineer doesn't talk to them nicely, so they don't do it. And then you get all these employee numbers that aren't being updated in the right way. And instead, the way that we think about that is that the HR team would have a data product that is all of those details, but they would mask within that data product anything that is sensitive, and only serve up the stuff that is, useful elsewhere in the organization, such as employee reference numbers or things like that, so that others can then build their products around that or build their analytics around that. And so we also, TerminusDB is a version database, so it allows you to go back in time. We do branches, which I spoke about, which is kind of allows you to have multiple worlds at the same time. So that Git for data sort of idea. Time travel, you can go back, you can do Git blame to see who made the mistake, and then go and hit them with that pitchfork. And then collaboration, which is really important. So you may, different changes made at different times to that data product. So say you have multiple people working on it, then you can rebase them. So you bring everything back into a main branch with a rebase. So that's really to try and enable fearless experimentation, and allows people to do structured data development. And I think, to my mind, that's a really important point, because one of the problems with non-professionals working with data is that they're scared, and the ability to roll back, or to work on a branch, allows people to not be afraid. And what we find from software engineer collaboration is that's really important. That not introducing breaking changes is a really important feature.
I think it's a great point in general, and that happens as well in a lot of our conversations about data on Kubernetes. Is that sometimes the feeling is leave the data alone, don't touch it, don't move it, don't look at it, don't give it the evil eye. Be very careful with anything around that. So having, like you said, that safety net, I think, is a very encouraging element for folks as well too, who traditionally wouldn't see themselves as stakeholders. And once in this sort of environment, going back to the socio-technological change. I really like this point.
Yeah, and I think so. And I think, if I give you, Bart, my beautiful Excel document that I have spent the last 6 years curating, it's all about the statistics of the Irish national basketball team. And I have carefully...
So it's a full document.
Well, full document, yeah, over years. And I have carefully inputted loads of formula into that in order to do lots of careful calculations. Now, if I give you that to work on, not only will I be nervous because I don't want you to break it, but you'll be nervous because you don't want to break it.
Yep.
And allowing people to roll back to earlier versions or to work on a branch of that document or a branch of that production database, just it can potentially be a game changer for how people think about it.
Yeah. Real quick, we got a question. How is data governance applied to TerminusDB?
So it's a really good one, because it kind of goes back to this. Where is the slide? This one. So TerminusDB is a technology, and really data governance is all about, is mostly about the organizational challenges. It's mostly things that TerminusDB can't solve. What TerminusDB can help people do is, discover that data, build catalogs around it, but it's not a process-oriented piece of technology. So it requires people to separately build those internal organizational principles and processes that allow them to govern the data. And really, if I was working for IBM, I'd tell you that I had a different product that could solve it, but I really don't. I can only give the document graph aspect that allows people to better and more easily manage their data products. But really, we're only one piece of a much broader puzzle, and can only ever really be one piece of that broader puzzle. And this is the piece of that puzzle that we're really all about, which is the collaboration, knowledge graphs, and commit graphs. Knowledge graphs exposed via simple HTTP APIs and JSON document interfaces, collaboration with branch, rebase, push and pull, and then the commit graph, which allows you to time travel, backup, and recovery. And that is what TerminusDB is. And so just to return to our friend here, at the end of the story, for all of his challenges, I think he's fairly happy in this new world. I think that he's able to work at his team's own cadence, which is important. I think he has more ownership over the data and the data model that his team is generating. And he has more pride in the data that's being produced, and he's not just throwing it over the wall to the data warehouse team, data engineering team, for them to deal with. And wait a second, I did have one more slide, but it isn't loading. Anyway, my final slide was just to say that if I haven't convinced you that you should be interested in data mesh, it was a Google Trends slide that shows it kind of becoming ever more popular. And you should probably just check it out just because other people are talking about it. And I find in this world that there is no smoke. If there's smoke, there's going to be fire. And people are finding something that resonates with them. And I'll stop sharing now. But I find that in a lot of the debates around this, it gets into quite a polarized world, and between what I sometimes call relational bros or SQL fundamentalists, who are very, who are very bought into the idea of data warehouses, are bought into relational database warehouses, and for good reason. I mean, they solve a big challenge that people have faced in how they scale and structure their data over the last 20 years. But I also find that there's something very real about the sort of pain and trouble that people are talking about when they talk about data mesh, when they talk about scaling data engineering teams, when they talk about people losing ownership of the data, when they talk about data as a product in particular, which I think really resonates with people, and that product rather than asset thinking. Because if data is an asset, as it is in the data warehouse world, or more is in the data warehouse world, then it's to be guarded and protected. And if data is a product, it's something to be invested in and shared, which is a different mentality. And I think it's right for some organizations, and wrong for others. Some people really care about control, and control is really important. And if control is the thing that people care about most, then data warehouses and data lakes are very good, because you can put walls up around them, you can limit access, you can control much more, you have a much easier and better interface for that type of thing. But I think that if you want to scale and you want to give ownership to your teams, then people are starting to migrate across to data meshes in one form or another. And they're usually building them on existing technologies. It's not a vendor rich space at all. Mostly people are doing it on the back of their existing AWS services or GCP services. They're not buying a whole suite of new things. I think new tooling will start to emerge, and definitely on the data catalog side, we've seen a whole bunch of new tools come along that spin outs from LinkedIn and from Airbnb, open source spin out kind of things that are very cool, and provide that kind of visibility across your data ecosystem or data domain. But again, it's not it has, in many ways, the data mesh community has the kind of opposite challenge to some of the others, like the ML ops community, which people probably know, which you have to beat the vendors back with a stick all the time, because they're constantly trying to bite everybody and say, oh, what about this? In the data mesh community, often it's like, come on, vendors, tell us what you got. What do you got, guys? It's
I mean, that's something that's with something that's nascent, that's so innovative, that is yet to be dominated by those vendors. Once again, shout out IBM, shout out to IBM. No, but it's true, is that it's and obviously that has pros and cons. It means that there's plenty of fresh ideas and lots of energy going into it, but to separate the wheat from the chaff, to really try to get down to it, it's like, hey, can we just have a technical conversation about this, rather than check out our new features, or jump in right now and get some kind of a discount. I think from the user's perspective, that's where it becomes a challenge, and some folks don't want to have to go through that. I would say that it's something that I think that when you're in these spaces, it would seem with Kubernetes, you assume I talked about this many times, you assume you're going to walk down the street, 10 people are going to be talking about Kubernetes. Well, guess what? Nobody. And
not all around here, Bart. I'm telling you, I walked down the street, went for a cycle earlier. Everybody, K8s.
Yeah, K8s and Irish national basketball team. And which, by the way, I did a little bit of research while we were talking. And in their first international debut, they played Mexico, and they lost by 62 points, 71-9 in 1948. So that was a tough one. But since then, they've improved a lot. In 1990, they crushed Gibraltar, 112-39. So there are surprises everywhere in Ireland. But I think the point is that data mesh is it's a growing community. There's a growing amount of interest in this. Obviously, Jean-Marc Degani is kind of, leading the charge or has been, central figure. So if you want to know more about this, there's tons of, blogs and things like that.
Tons. And
Tons
I tried not to kind of go back over that ground because there's just a lot about like
no, that's it.
Central ideas, which
But
I think people should check out because it's really quite interesting and it's quite a philosophical sort of thing. And for that, people who are very practically minded sometimes can be a bit quick to dismiss it because it's like, it's exactly as you said. It's like, you got to separate things out. Like, how do I do this? What am I going to do here? And people want something to do. And that's not really there in a lot of the core ideas around it. It's more like, here's a framework in which we could think about these things. And here's a very domain-driven design sort of way of approaching these problems without then getting to the nuts and bolts. And I think even in Jean-Marc's stuff for ThoughtWorks, a big global consultancy, she identifies that there's gaps that are being poorly plugged in existing implementations by AWS Glue often. Shout
out to AWS.
Yeah.
No, but I know what you mean. But I think also is that, it's a similar challenge we encounter with data on Kubernetes. There is a book that's being written for O'Reilly by some of our community members. And it's really exciting to see that, the participation of different folks getting involved, but a lot of the stuff is still being done for the first time. So it's not codified yet. There's not like a one-stop shop for how to do this. So because of involving that trial and error, there are going to be some holes involved. I would say though, and to your point, as you mentioned, and that's why, because I think I listened to the first podcast about that within the last year. And as a non-technical person, but because we're talking about, paradigmatic changes, organizational development, resistance to change management, which, however, though, I think are, whether we're talking about operators or we're talking about, writing stateful workloads in Kubernetes, these things, as technological as they are, they do involve either bottom up or top down changes that have to take place of different sources of pressure and interest. And if we miss that part of the conversation, I think we're missing out on a lot of it. So anyway, it's my 2 cents on that. One thing I do want to ask is that when we put data mesh in the context of Kubernetes, is there anything special that stands out there talking about stakeholders, or is it something that is still not getting to that point yet, maybe not mature enough? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I'm not really sure, to be honest. I mean, my basic point of view is that the data mesh can be implemented in lots of different ways, and that therefore Kubernetes is going to be a core part of that for certain teams that are already using Kubernetes for whatever they want to, and that they can probably mesh together pretty effectively. But again, I agree that that we're not far enough along to see what best practice is, to see how we talk about best practice in terms of tooling, in terms of, even in terms of team composition. I don't think we're quite there yet. In terms of governance, as you'll have heard from some of the questions I answered, they're a little bit woolly because it's like, well, that's not really that solved yet. There's a lot of conversation, discussion within individual organizations for how you best go about that. And how you set up a good data catalog and provide observability and discoverability for the data that's out there, and then put governance rules on top of that, automated governance rules. So I just think that there's a lot, there's a long way to go with this, and that it can be implemented in lots and lots of different ways. And that the most important thing we should take from this is that there's an issue that data mesh is addressing, and that resonates with a lot of people. And whether you agree with the solution or not, which many people don't, you have to recognize that there's something that has resonated that's important to people and important to professionals that are working in data organizations in different places, and who are putting a lot of effort into trying to make this. And if you look at something like Airbnb, they have a type of data meshy sort of setup that was built before data mesh was really a very strong idea. And guys like that are using Kubernetes. It's just about how they use them and where they use them and where they fit into their processes.
Great stuff. Excellent. Very, very good. Luke, as always, a pleasure to be with you. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. You can tell you were a diplomat. And, but I also like what you said as well, too, is that, as what happens with every technology, there are tribes, there are camps, there's this group, there's that group, the cool kids are doing it, they're not doing it. Anyway, I think that I really do respect the fact that you come to this, arena with the diplomatic experience that you have, having been in different countries. I think there's a lot to be said for that as we look at things on a macro level of seeing what's going on in terms of trends and just basic human patterns playing themselves out as they've done in so many other places.
Yeah, and Bart, importantly there, I think that, like a lot of this stuff, it kind of has to be bottom up. There's a feeling of, I don't know, there's an interplay between top down and bottom up that's difficult to kind of get your finger on, because a lot of this is like, organizational governance. Here's a big picture of my organizational governance, and I'm going to impose a solution on everybody. But there has to be a bottom up pressure there as well to say that I have seen a problem. I recognize that problem. I now wish to kind of work with building something that is better for us all. And really that's where we come from, where I come from the open source tradition that's very focused on trying to give people tooling that they want to use. Nobody's going to force you to use any open source tool. I mean, there's no...
Like you said, I think that's why with the bottom up sort of approach is that demands more authenticity and legitimacy and honest, real, genuine support. Perhaps there's something to be said for that rather than just, CTO says all of a sudden we're switching to this and we got to do it that way. Now, almost from a talent perspective, you can't really afford to do that in an organizational level because people will leave if they don't feel like they're being taken into consideration for certain technological decisions. And I've seen that happen. So I think that's a really nice point too. Just because we got a little bit of time left, anything else we should know about Terminus, stuff that's coming up? Are you hiring? Are you not hiring? Are you looking? Are you growing?
We're growing. We don't have any specific hiring plans right now, just because we need to kind of get around to delivering them. So we just launched this JSON patch and diff API. So we're excited about that. It kind of is open, so anybody can go and throw whatever JSONs they have at it and see what the differences are between them. We are about to launch a Excel integration to try and bring Excel data into the graph and allow people to really do that very simply. And we're about to launch a bunch of tooling around a schema as a service for MongoDB. So that's all up on our website, and we're blogging about it. Those are the kind of things that we're going to be really focused on TerminusDB for a while. We're very much a bottoms up sort of organization. So it's all about software developers. It's all about data professionals coming and using the tooling and liking it, and us trying to improve the developer experience. So it's we live and die by the viewers of data on Kubernetes.
Good, much appreciated. Very, very happy to hear that. And as it once again goes to the point of authenticity, as is tradition in the data on Kubernetes community, I'd like to share my screen right now so the folks can see the amazing artwork that was done while Luke was talking, and by our amazing artist Angel. So we see quite a few different concepts here. We got Freddy Krueger, we got a shopping cart, we've got quite a few different things. Did the Irish national basketball team make it in here, or we'll have to, anyway, this could be a basketball net. This could be a basketball. The data mesh is really just a basketball net. No, but it's good. Luke, absolute pleasure. Always so nice to have you with us in the community. Hopefully we can get something together in person in Ireland that doesn't have to be about crypto or Web3. But yeah, thank you very much for your time and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks, Bart. Thanks, everybody. See ya.
Enjoy your orange peels. Cheers.
Cheers, man.